A cold producer's walls shatter when one smile from Jungkook awakens emotions Suga buried for years. Smile at me like that. The words came out harsher than intended, slicing through the charged silence of the studio as rain battered the windows like a restless heartbeat. The dim yellow light flickered once, briefly illuminating the sharp tension in Suga's eyes. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. Like what? Suga turned away too quickly, as if eye contact alone was dangerous. Like you don't know what you're doing. Jungkook did know. That was the problem. The studio was suffocatingly warm despite the storm outside, thick with the smell of coffee gone cold and the faint hum of overworked equipment. A half-finished track played softly in the background, melancholic, distant, like it was waiting for something to complete it, or someone. Jungkook leaned back against the wall, arms loosely crossed, studying Suga with quiet intensity. "You've been avoiding me all week," he said, voice calm but deliberate. "And now you're blaming my smile." Suga let out a dry laugh, running a hand through his hair. "You're imagining things. I don't think I am." Stretched heavy, uneasy, outside, thunder cracked, low and distant. Suga hated this feeling, not the tension, not the confrontation, but the way Jungkook stood there, unshaken, unafraid, like he could see right through everything Suga had spent years building to protect himself. Control. Distance. Silence. It had always been enough, until Jungkook. Months ago, Jungkook had entered his life like something soft but persistent, unexpected, bright in a way that didn't demand attention but somehow took it anyway. At first, Suga had dismissed him as just another talented voice. Promising, yes, but replaceable. That assumption hadn't lasted long. Jungkook worked differently. He didn't just sing, he felt everything. Every note carried something raw, something honest, something Suga had trained himself to bury, and worst of all, he smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for cameras or audiences, the kind that slipped out quietly, unguarded, as if he didn't realize how much it could undo someone. Suga turned back slightly, his gaze landing on Jungkook again despite himself. "Stop looking at me like that," he muttered. Jungkook tilted his head. "Like what?" "Like you're waiting for me to say something." Jungkook's lips curved faintly. "Maybe I am." Suga exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his face. "You're not going to get it." "What?" Suga hesitated, and in that hesitation something cracked. Jungkook pushed off the wall, stepping closer, slow but intentional. The space between them shrank, the air shifting, charged with something neither of them named. "You think I don't notice?" Jungkook said softly. "The way you shut down every time things get real." Suga's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern. It is if it involves me." That landed deeper than Jungkook probably intended. Suga looked at him fully now, eyes sharper, more exposed than before. "You don't know anything about me." Jungkook didn't flinch. "Then tell me." The simplicity of it was almost infuriating. Suga let out a quiet, bitter breath. "It's not that easy." Jungkook's voice softened. "Maybe it is, you just don't want it to be." That was the truth, and Suga hated it, because wanting something meant risking it, and Suga didn't risk things he couldn't control. "I don't do this," Suga said, more to himself than to Jungkook. "What?" Suga gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is." Jungkook glanced down briefly, then back up, something more serious settling into his expression. "You mean feeling something?" Suga didn't answer, because yes, that's exactly what he meant. The rain grew heavier, tapping insistently against the glass, filling the silence that followed. Jungkook took another step closer, close enough now that Suga could hear the slight hitch in his breath. Close enough that pretending became impossible. "You're scared," Jungkook said quietly. Suga let out a humorless laugh. "You think that's it?" "I know it is." Suga shook his head, but there was no conviction behind it. "You don't get it." "Then make me understand." Suga's chest tightened, because the truth wasn't simple. It was years of disappointment, of trusting the wrong people, of watching things fall apart the moment he let them matter too much. It was learning that distance was safer than closeness. That silence was safer than honesty, that not feeling was safer than this. "I had something like this before," Suga said finally, voice low, almost distant. "Didn't end well." Jungkook's expression softened, but he didn't interrupt. "It taught me something," Suga continued. "If you don't let things get close, they can't break you." Jungkook was quiet for a moment, then gently, "And has that worked?" Suga hesitated, because for a long time it had, until now. Jungkook's lips curved again, not wide, not dramatic, just soft. Real, and there it was, that smile, the one that made everything Suga believed in feel fragile. "You're still here," Jungkook said quietly. "Talking to me, letting me get this close." Suga swallowed. "That doesn't sound like someone who doesn't let things in." Suga looked at him, really looked at him, searching for something, doubt, hesitation, anything that would make it easier to pull away. But Jungkook just stood there open, honest, unafraid. And smiling, always smiling. Stop doing that, Suga murmured. Jungkook blinked slightly. Doing what? That, Suga said, softer now, smiling like it doesn't change anything. Jungkook's smile faded just a little, not completely, but enough to shift something in the air. What if it does? Jungkook asked. Suga didn't answer. Because it already had, Jungkook took one final step, closing the space between them entirely. Suga didn't move away, didn't step back, didn't hide. For the first time in a long time, he just stayed. You don't have to be afraid of this, Jungkook said, voice barely above a whisper. Suga let out a slow breath. Maybe I do. Jungkook shook his head slightly. Or maybe you're just not used to something that doesn't hurt. That hit deeper than anything else. Because Suga didn't have an answer for that, the storm outside began to soften, the rain easing into a quieter rhythm like the world itself was calming down. Inside, the tension shifted, not gone. But different. Suga's hand lifted slightly, hesitant, uncertain, before stopping halfway, as if even that small movement carried too much weight. Jungkook noticed. But he didn't rush it, didn't push, he just stayed. And that was what broke the last of Suga's resistance. Slowly, carefully, Suga closed the distance himself, not much, just enough. You're going to regret this, Suga murmured, though there was no real warning in his voice anymore. Jungkook's smile returned, softer now, but no less powerful. I don't think I will. Suga stared at him for a second longer, then quietly, almost reluctantly, he smiled back, small, barely there, but real, and in that moment. Something shifted irreversibly, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. The walls Suga had built didn't disappear, but they cracked. And through those cracks, something warm began to grow, not because Jungkook forced it, not because Suga let it, but because, for once, he didn't stop it. The smile didn't last long on Suga's lips, but the fact that it had been there at all felt louder than anything he had ever said. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain outside softened into a quiet whisper, sliding down the glass like the tension slowly easing out of the room. The dim studio lights hummed faintly, wrapping everything in a warm, fragile stillness that felt almost unreal. Jungkook noticed it immediately. The way Suga's expression changed after that brief smile, like he had revealed something he wasn't ready to fully face yet. You just smiled, Jungkook said softly, not teasing, not pushing, just statting it as if it mattered. Suga exhaled through his nose, looking away again. Don't make it a big deal. Jungkook tilted his head slightly. It is a big deal. Suga scoffed lightly, but there was no real sharpness behind it anymore. It's just a smile. Jungkook shook his head, stepping just a little closer, not enough to crowd him, but enough to stay within that fragile space they had created. No, not from you. That made Suga pause, because Jungkook wasn't wrong. Suga didn't smile easily. Not like that. Not without thinking. Not without control. And yet it had happened. Suga rubbed the back of his neck, a subtle habit he only showed when something unsettled him. You're reading too much into it. Jungkook's lips curved faintly again, softer this time. Or maybe you're trying not to. That hit closer than Suga wanted. He let out a quiet breath, his shoulders dropping slightly as if he was too tired to keep arguing. You always do this. Do what? Make things harder than they should be. Jungkook frowned just a little. I think you mean easier than you want them to be. Suga glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger but in reluctant acknowledgement, because that was exactly it. Jungkook didn't complicate things, he simplified them. And that was what made everything feel so overwhelming. The unfinished track in the background looped again, the soft melody filling the silence between their words. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting. Suga walked past Jungkook, heading toward the console, but slower than usual, like he wasn't trying to escape, just thinking. Jungkook watched him carefully. You're doing it again. Suga didn't turn. Doing what now? Running. Suga let out a small, almost amused breath. I'm literally just walking. You know what I mean. Suga's hand rested on the console, fingers tapping lightly against the surface, a habit when his thoughts got too loud. I'm not running, Suga said quietly. Jungkook stepped closer again, closing the space Suga had tried to create. Then stay. Suga froze, not visibly, but something in his posture shifted because staying had always been the hardest part. Suga slowly turned around. Jungkook was right there, still, waiting but not demanding. Suga studied him, searching again for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that would justify stepping back. But Jungkook just stood there, steady as ever. You don't give up, do you? Suga muttered. Jungkook shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. Not when it matters. Suga's gaze softened just slightly, "And this matters?" he asked. Jungkook didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." The certainty in his voice landed deep, too deep. Suga looked away for a second, his chest tightening in a way he wasn't used to. "You're going to get hurt." Jungkook's expression didn't change. "Maybe. That doesn't scare you." Jungkook met his gaze again, calm and unwavering. "Not as much as pretending this isn't real." Suga fell silent, because there it was again, that honesty, that terrifying, simple truth. Suga let out a slow breath, his fingers curling slightly at his side. "You really don't make this easy." Stepped closer, just enough for their shoulders to almost touch. "I'm not trying to." Suga let out a quiet, almost defeated laugh. "Yeah, I noticed." Silence, but this one wasn't sharp, it was shifting. Suga's eyes flickered down briefly, just for a second, to the space between them, then back up. "I don't stop you," Suga said slowly. "Say I let this happen." Jungkook's heart skipped slightly at that. "Then what?" Suga continued. "What do you expect?" Jungkook thought about it for a moment, not rushing, not overthinking, then softly, "Nothing you're not willing to give." That answer made something in Suga finally loosen. No pressure, no demands, just presence. Suga nodded slowly, almost to himself. "'Kay," he said. Jungkook blinked. "Okay." Suga met his gaze again, more steady now. "Okay." The word was simple, but it carried weight, permission, acceptance, maybe even something more. Jungkook's smile returned, not bright, not overwhelming, just warm, and somehow that warmth didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt right. Suga shook his head lightly, a small smile slipping through again despite himself. "You're dangerous, you know that." Jungkook raised an eyebrow, amused. "Because I smile. Because you don't stop." Jungkook chuckled softly. "Neither do you." Suga didn't argue. Because for once, he wasn't trying to stop anything. The track behind them faded out, the room falling into a gentle silence again. Suga glanced at the equipment, then back at Jungkook. "We should finish this." Jungkook nodded. "Yeah." Neither of them moved immediately, because something had already been finished, something far more important than the song. Suga finally stepped toward the console, adjusting a few settings, his movements more relaxed now. Jungkook slipped on the headphones, his fingers brushing lightly against Suga. As he took them, this time, neither of them pulling away. "Ready?" Suga asked, his voice quieter, steadier. Jungkook nodded, meeting his eyes. "Always." The music started again, but this time it didn't feel like something they were chasing. It felt like something they had already found. And as Jungkook's voice filled the studio, soft, emotional, undeniably real, Suga didn't look away, didn't hide, didn't pretend. He just listened. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.
The red recording light flickered on, steady and unblinking, as if it were watching them, witnessing something neither of them could fully name yet. Jungkook closed his eyes the moment the music settled into rhythm, letting the sound wrap around him like something familiar, something safe. His voice came in softer this time, less about perfection and more about feeling, each note carrying something fragile that hovered just beneath the surface. Across the glass, Suga didn't move. He stood there, one hand resting lightly on the console, the other hanging at his side, still and quiet in a way that felt different from before. He wasn't analyzing. He wasn't adjusting levels or thinking about structure. He was listening, really listening. Jungkook's voice filled the studio, warm and raw, slipping into the empty spaces Suga had always kept untouched. It wasn't just the melody anymore. It was the way Jungkook breathed between lines, the way his voice wavered slightly on certain words, like he was letting something real slip through. And Suga felt it, every part of it. It unsettled him. But not in the way he was used to. This wasn't discomfort, this was something softer, something he didn't want to push away. Jungkook reached the chorus, his voice lifting, stronger now, but still carrying that quiet vulnerability. The lyrics, unfinished just hours ago, now sounded complete in a way Suga hadn't expected, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. The last note lingered before fading into silence. The red light blinked once, then turned off. Jungkook opened his eyes slowly, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm he hadn't quite let go of yet. For a moment he stayed still, as if afraid that moving would break whatever had just happened. Then he glanced through the glass. Suga was already looking at him, not with his usual guarded expression, but something quieter, something that made Jungkook's chest tighten just a little. "How was it?" Jungkook asked, his voice softer now, almost unsure. Suga didn't answer right away. He pressed a button, replaying the recording. Jungkook's voice filled the room again, echoing between them. They both listened. This time together. When it ended, the silence didn't feel empty. Suga leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, not as a defense but as if grounding himself. "It's good," he said. Jungkook raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming. "That's it," Suga huffed quietly. "You want a full analysis, I want the truth." Suga's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. "It's better than good," Suga admitted, his voice lower now. "It feels real." Jungkook's smile softened at that. "Yeah, it does." Suga nodded once, almost to himself. Then before he could overthink it, he pushed the door open and stepped into the recording room. The space felt smaller suddenly, closer. Jungkook slipped off the headphones, setting them down carefully, his fingers brushing the metal frame absent-mindedly. "So," he said lightly, producer approval. Suga walked closer, stopping just a step away. "Get cocky," Suga muttered, though the edge in his voice was gone. Jungkook laughed softly. "Too late," was a pause, not awkward, just full. Suga's eyes flickered briefly to Jungkook's lips, then back up, so quick it almost went unnoticed. Almost. Jungkook didn't say anything about it, he didn't have to. Instead, he leaned slightly against the wall, watching Suga with that same quiet patience that had been undoing him all night. "You're still holding back," Jungkook said after a moment. Suga frowned slightly. "About what?" Jungkook shrugged lightly. "Something." Suga let out a breath, running a hand through his hair again. "You're impossible." Smiled faintly. "And yet you're still here." Suga didn't argue because that was becoming a pattern. Suga glanced at the equipment behind Jungkook, then back at him. "We should do another take." Jungkook tilted his head. "You think it needs it?" Suga hesitated. He said honestly, "But I think you can go further." Jungkook's expression shifted, more focused now, more serious. "Further how?" Suga stepped a little closer. "Stop thinking about how it sounds," he said quietly. "And just feel it." Jungkook held his gaze. For a second it felt like the room shrank again, like everything narrowed down to just this moment. "You mean like earlier?" Jungkook asked. Suga nodded once. Jungkook inhaled slowly, then reached for the headphones again. "Okay." Slipped them on, adjusting the mic slightly. The music started again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Jungkook's voice came in stronger, deeper, but still soft where it needed to be. It wasn't just singing anymore. It was confession, it was presence, it was everything he hadn't said out loud. Behind the glass, Suga watched, and something shifted again. Because now it wasn't just Jungkook being honest, it was Suga realizing he wanted to meet him there. Halfway wasn't enough anymore. The second take ended, silence. Then Suga turned off the system. He didn't replay it, didn't analyze it. Instead, he walked straight back into the room. Jungkook pulled off the headphones, looking at him expectantly. "Well?" Jungkook asked. Suga didn't answer, not with words. He stopped right in front of Jungkook, closer than before, his gaze steady but no longer guarded. "You went further," Suga said quietly. Jungkook nodded slightly. "You asked me to." Suga's lips twitched faintly. "I did." Pause, then Jungkook asked, softer now. "What about you?" Suga stilled. "What about me?" Jungkook met his gaze, unwavering. "Are you going to keep stopping halfway?" The question lingered, heavy but not overwhelming. Suga looked at him for a long moment, then slowly. "No," Suga said. Jungkook's breath hitched slightly. "Good," he murmured. Suga hesitated for a fraction of a second, then he reached out, not uncertain this time, not stopping halfway. His fingers brushed against Jungkook's wrist first, light, deliberate, then slid down, finding his hand, holding it, simple, quiet, real. Jungkook didn't move, didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers tightened slightly around Suga, grounding the moment, making it solid. The room was silent again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of something they were finally allowing themselves to have. Suga let out a slow breath, his voice softer than it had ever been. "Guess I'm learning." Jungkook smiled, that same smile, the one that had started all of this. But now it didn't feel dangerous anymore, it felt like home. Their hands stayed like that longer than either of them expected. Not tight. Not desperate, just there, warm, real. Suga didn't let go immediately, which in itself said more than anything he could have put into words. His thumb shifted slightly against Jungkook's hand, an unconscious movement that made Jungkook's breath catch just a little. The studio felt smaller again, but not suffocating. Closer, like the space between them had finally stopped being something to fight against. Jungkook glanced down at their hands for a second. Then back up, his voice quiet but steady. "You're not pulling away." Suga exhaled softly, almost like a quiet laugh. You noticed. I notice everything about you. That should have made Suga uncomfortable, it didn't. Instead, something in his chest tightened, but not in a way that made him want to step back, in a way that made him want to stay. Suga tilted his head slightly, studying Jungkook's face again, like he was still trying to understand how someone could be this open. Sounds exhausting, smiled faintly. Only when you pretend I don't. Suga shook his head lightly, but there was no denial left in him now, because pretending had already started to fall apart. The faint hum of the equipment filled the silence again, grounding them in something familiar. Outside, the rain had almost stopped completely, leaving behind a soft, distant drip from the edges of the building. Time had slowed, or maybe it just felt that way. What happens now? Jungkook asked quietly. It wasn't a demanding question, not a push, just curiosity. Suga looked down briefly, their hands still connected, then back up. For once, he didn't overthink it. We don't rush it, Suga said. Jungkook nodded slowly. Okay, we don't pretend it's not there either. Jungkook's smile softened. Okay, the simplicity of it made something in Suga ease again. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty. Suga shifted slightly, letting his shoulder brush lightly against Jungkook's this time. The contact was subtle but intentional. Jungkook didn't move away. Instead, he leaned into it just enough to match. They stood like that in quiet for a moment, side by side, the tension from earlier replaced by something calmer, something steady. Suga glanced toward the glass window of the recording booth, then back at Jungkook. We should listen to the final take. Jungkook nodded. Yeah, neither of them let go right away. It took a second, then another. Before Suga finally loosened his grip, not completely, just enough to move. Jungkook followed him back toward the console, their shoulders still occasionally brushing, the space between them no longer something to measure. Suga pressed a button. The track started again. This time they stood side by side, listening, not as producer and vocalist, not as two people trying to outdo each other, but as two people hearing something that belonged to both of them. Jungkook's voice filled the room again, layered with emotion that neither of them could deny anymore. Suga leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on the console, but his focus wasn't on the technical details. It was on the feeling, on how the song had changed, on how he had changed. Halfway through the track, Jungkook spoke softly. You don't look like you're analyzing it. Suga didn't look away from the console. I'm not. Jungkook raised an eyebrow slightly. That's new, Suga huffed quietly. Don't get used to it. Smiled. Too late. Suga shook his head again, but there was a faint smile on his lips, more natural now, less forced. The track reached the chorus and Jungkook's voice swelled, filling the space completely. Suga closed his eyes for a brief second just to feel it. When the song ended, the silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full, complete. Suga straightened slightly, his fingers tapping lightly against the console again, old habits mixing with new ones. It's done, Suga said. Jungkook blinked. That's it, Suga nodded once. Yeah, Jungkook studied him for a moment. You're not going to change anything. Suga glanced at him, then shook his head. He said quietly, if we touch it again, we'll start thinking too much. Let out a small breath, nodding slowly. Yeah, you're right. Pause, then Jungkook added softer, it feels right like this. Suga met his gaze again. Yeah, Suga said, it does. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Not awkward, not uncertain, just steady. Jungkook leaned back slightly against the console, arms loosely crossed, but his posture relaxed. So what now? Suga considered the question, not just about the song, about everything. He looked around the studio, the place that had always been his refuge, his controlled space, his way of keeping the world at a distance. And then he looked at Jungkook, standing there, still, present, not something to control. Not something to push away, something to keep. Suga exhaled slowly. We release it, he said. Jungkook's eyebrows lifted slightly. Just like that, Suga nodded, just like that. Smiled softer this time. Together, Suga didn't hesitate, together. The word felt different now, stronger, real. Jungkook looked down briefly, then back up, something warm settling in his expression again. That sounds good, Jungkook said. Suga watched him for a moment. Then without overthinking it, he reached out again. This time not hesitant, not halfway, his hand found Jungkook. Again, simple, natural, like it had already become something familiar. Jungkook's fingers curled around his without pause, no surprise, no hesitation. Outside, the rain had stopped completely now. The city lights reflected softly against the wet streets, the world moving on as it always did. But inside the studio, something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that wouldn't fade. Suga glanced at their joined hands briefly, then back at Jungkook, a small, genuine smile forming again. Guess I'm getting used to this, Suga murmured. Jungkook smiled back, warm, steady, unchanged. Good, he said softly. And this time Suga didn't look away. They stayed like that for a while, the quiet stretching comfortably around them until the faint vibration of a phone broke the stillness. It was Suga's. Suga didn't move at first, his fingers still loosely intertwined with Jungkook's. The screen lit up on the console, name flashing, persistent. Jungkook glanced at it briefly. You should probably get that. Suga exhaled, clearly reluctant, then slowly let go, though not without his thumb brushing once against Jungkook's hand before pulling away completely. A small gesture. Easy to miss. Jungkook didn't miss it. Suga picked up the phone, glancing at the screen before answering, his voice shifting into something more composed, more controlled. Yeah. Was a pause. Jungkook watched the subtle change, the way Suga's shoulders straightened, the way his expression sharpened just slightly. Not distant but guarded again, reality creeping back in. I told you I'd send it when it's done, Suga continued, tone calm but firm. No, I'm not changing it. Pause. Jungkook leaned back against the console, arms loosely folded, observing without interrupting. Suga's gaze flickered toward him for just a second, brief, grounding before returning to the conversation. It's already decided, Suga said. We're releasing it. The word didn't go unnoticed. Jungkook's chest warmed slightly at that. Suga listened again, his jaw tightening just a little. No, he said more firmly this time. It's not a solo. Silence then. Quieter but steady, it was never meant to be. Pause, then Suga ended the call. The room fell silent again, but something had shifted. Jungkook straightened slightly. They want you to release it alone. Wasn't a question. Suga set the phone down, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, Jungkook studied him carefully. And you said no. Suga glanced at him, expression unreadable for a second, then simply, I said no. Let out a slow breath, something tight in his chest easing without him realizing it had been there. You didn't hesitate, Jungkook said quietly. Suga leaned back against the console, arms crossing loosely. I already made that mistake once. Jungkook frowned slightly. What do you mean? Suga looked down briefly, then back up, his voice softer now, choosing what's easier over what's right. Jungkook didn't interrupt, didn't push, he just listened. Suga exhaled slowly. I'm not doing that again. The words settled between them, simple but heavy with something deeper. Jungkook nodded, a faint smile forming again. Good. Suga glanced at him, catching that smile. There it was again, that same quiet warmth, and this time it didn't make him look away, it made him step closer. Get used to me agreeing with you, Suga muttered, though the edge was gone. Jungkook chuckled softly. Too late. Suga shook his head, but there was a softness in his expression now that hadn't been there before. A beat of silence passed, then Jungkook spoke again, quieter this time. Are you worried? Suga raised an eyebrow. About what? About what happens when it's out there, Jungkook said. The song, Us. Suga didn't answer immediately, his gaze shifted toward the window where the city lights reflected against the wet streets, the world outside moving like nothing had changed, but everything had. I don't like things I can't control, Suga admitted. Jungkook nodded slightly. I figured. Suga glanced back at him. But this, he hesitated, searching for the right word. This isn't something I want to control. Jungkook's expression softened. Then what is it? Jungkook asked gently. Suga looked at him, really looked at him, and for once the answer came without resistance. It's something I want to keep. Jungkook's breath caught just slightly, not because he didn't expect it, but because hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. Jungkook smiled, soft, steady, the kind of smile that didn't demand anything but still gave everything. Then keep it, Jungkook said. Suga huffed a quiet breath, something close to a laugh escaping him. You really make everything sound simple. Jungkook shrugged lightly. Maybe it is. Suga didn't argue this time, because maybe it was. Another silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something steady, something growing. Suga pushed himself off the console, walking toward the window, his hands slipping into his pockets. He stood there for a moment, watching the city, the reflections of lights dancing across the glass. Jungkook stayed where he was, giving him space but not distance. You know, Suga said after a moment, his voice quieter now, this changes how people see us. Jungkook nodded. Yeah, they'll talk. Yeah, they'll make assumptions. Jungkook smiled faintly. They already do. That pulled a small laugh from Suga. Yeah, he admitted. Another pause, then Suga turned slightly, looking back at him. Does that bother you? Suga asked. Jungkook thought for a moment, then shook his head. Not if we know what's real. Suga held his gaze.